Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for a debate that we believe is really topical, not that is just a part of the European Year of Skills, but it's more or less a very good moment to celebrate somehow what we have already achieved these years and at the same time looking towards the future. My name is Dragos Pisaru. I'm the chair of the Committee of Employment and Social Affairs, and I have this great privilege of hosting the event today, together with the 5 amazing agencies that are helping us at the Parliament, the Commission, the Council, us all with the policies that are related to the labor market, social affairs, to education, and to skills, of course. It is a great privilege for me to salute, to greet the directors of the 5 agencies, also the Director General of the DG Employment in the European Commission. And I really believe that it is quite important to reflect not just about skills in a silo way, but to have the broader view and setting the scene in a broader way. And I will try, of course, in just a couple of minutes to give this particular or to try to give a particular setting broader than talking just about skills. The first idea that I want to put forward is that this is a time of great reforms. The other day, we've seen the Franco-German proposal for reforming the European Union. We've seen there a lot of important changes in the governance that starts from, reshaping the activity of the Commission, of the Council, of the Parliament, that the need for a new treaty, the need to talk about enlargement, again, the concept that it's not so new about the concentric circles. And that means that we will face in the period to come unprecedented institutional challenges as well. We all already know that there are 2 high-level reports that have been already committed. One has been announced in the State of the Union speech by President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. And so Mario Draghi is going to draft a report on the future of competitiveness in the EU. The other one has already been committed to Enrico Letta on the future of the single market. And if we look in the past, and for all of us that have studied European integration, we've seen that these are, really important moments in the history of the EU of rethinking how we go forward. And the first idea that I would like to put forward related to the topic of today is that any type of reform that we may think of needs to go back to the values and the way in which the European Union is shaped, with its dual core, economic and social. So the first thing, and you will find it in the title of today's event, Skills for People. And I would say that it's very important to understand that without following the achievement of social Europe and following the European Pillar of Social Rights, we will have a very big difficulty in delivering these expectations and ambitions. Now, when it comes to skill shortage, for instance, because that's something that you see in many policy documents these days, and in the reality, the smaller entrepreneurs are talking about it. I think that in Belgium, for instance, reach up to more than 70% of the entrepreneurs are complaining about the fact that there is a skill shortage. But what is happening right now is that if we look at the grand challenges, skill shortage is basically more or less people shortage. We have a problem, a demographic problem. We are having an unprecedented challenge in terms of demography. And there are 2 ways to get more people into the labor market. On one hand, we are talking about activation measures, taking people out of poverty, of social exclusion. On the other hand, we are talking about immigration and integration and the whole debate on asylum and migration. And what we know is that it's not enough to talk about skills, about just formal training. First and foremost, we need an integrated approach that has really deep roots in education measures, health-related measures, housing, everything that it's about the quality of living. that will allow then people to look and search for jobs. And one important thing is how we are addressing the next generation, the children, the youth. And because right now we are still in a path dependency that is not necessarily giving us best prospects. And we do have policies there, but we are still lacking the right integration for that. So skills for people, I will also want to put it this way, people at the core, at the center of the reforms that we would like to do, and that's going to help us all managing the reforms that we are talking about. Then the second part of the title is skills for competitiveness. We are again in an unprecedented period of challenges. If we look at, for instance, the AI, the artificial intelligence challenge, the way in which this will create a Schumpeterian creative destruction that will affect the labor markets and will affect the way we look at skills, generally speaking. So technology is crucial for competitiveness, and it has deep implications on the skills debate. And then, of course, when we talk about competitiveness, we talk about the linking between social and economics and the economy. And our committee, the Employment and Social Affairs Committee, is involved directly in the negotiation of two important things that we will have a perspective on, even on the short term. One is the important file on economic governance. What kind of governance do we want for the future? How do we reflect the social dimension in the economic governance? If we talk about the adjusted fiscal path that will allow investment in people, and I read in between the lines investment in skills and the people and the skills of the people, then we need to redefine completely the whole concept of investment and social investment. And I will come back to that. And then another important thing is about the industry, and we have the Net Zero Industry Act with the academies and the ecosystems and the whole debate that we have new fields of activity and new value chains that we need to invest and have the particular skills that are necessary there. So skills for competitiveness doesn't mean necessarily that we need more and better training. It means that we need to reflect the way we invest in skills and the particular new skills that we would like to have. We don't have just skill shortage on the market. We have a lot of skill mismatch. We have a lot of inefficiency when it comes to the way we look at the field. Last but not least, and I think this is very important, is skills for sustainability. We all talk about the fact that sustainability and green and digital evolution are really important. But I am looking at sustainability from a different perspective as well. Of course, it is clear for everyone, I guess, that the fair twin transitions, green and digital, cannot be achieved without the people, without skills that would allow to deliver those transitions. But I would also want to look at the issue of sustainability in a different way. So far, because the debate about skills is not new, and I'm sure that we can all appreciate the measures in the last 2 decades that have boosted skills so far, and we should cherish the fact that we have a very strong base to start with. But what has somehow missed, we are kind of reactive when we talk about skills. We are trying to fix things on the markets. And I'm coming back here to the concept of social investment. I think that this year and next year would be an amazing opportunity to talk about redefining the way we look at social investment. With the support of the Spanish and Belgian presidencies, we are right now moving towards redefining this concept, about looking at social investment from a multi-annual perspective, about agreeing and accepting the fact that some recurrent expenditure that are related to the people that are working in social related institutions should be considered as part of this integrated investment. What is the good of investing in schools if you don't have professors? What is the good investing in hospitals if you don't have nurses or doctors? What is the good investing in day centers or kindergartens if you don't have educators or social workers. We do have a care strategy, and that's a very fine strategy. Our committee was really thrilled to be part of that work. But we don't yet have an understanding that brick and mortar investment need also the people that activate those institutions. So the pledge here is that if we would like to push for a European Union that really takes care of skills, then we need to look at the whole ecosystem that will bring us the required sustainability. This cannot be just the work of DG Employment. DG Employment is doing a wonderful thing, and it's basically providing flagship after flagship initiatives, and it was a period of, I would say, outstanding 4 years in terms of delivering the things that we promised in the European Pillar of Social Rights. But we need to have a broader view, an integrated view on these longer term investments. And this is in line, and I will close with that, is completely in line with the time of great reforms. It seems that there is a consensus that we can't just talk about vocational education and talk about skills if we don't have a broader look with European competencies on education. So then if we do that, of course, it comes without saying that we need to have an integrated approach about the entire educational ecosystem, which will completely change the paradigm that we are talking about. Now, I've tried to introduce the debate. You will hear from our amazing agencies, and I think that I need to say that in the end of my introduction, the agencies not only are providing state-of-the-art knowledge, and they are right now an amazing source of evidence for evidence-based policy, but they are in all the cases, in all the 5 cases of our agencies, they are one step forward in terms of coming up with the right concepts and looking at the future. Be that when we talk about health and safety and at work, and the kind of legislation that we keep going based on the evidence that show how important that's with Eurofound, looking at all the perspectives that are related to social, and recently helping us with also with the child guarantee, which is really, really important. We are certainly, when we talk about skills and education, we have Cedefop with an amazing power to set up the educational landscape. They have what we need for the next decades to come if we are just going to take on board their advice and strategic solutions. When it comes to ETF and the way in which Europe helps the education in member states, in countries that are close to us, I mean, I've just been thrilled to hear that we have a very active relation with Ukraine, so we are already building the bridges there, and Moldova as well. And then, I mean, it is of a paramount importance to understand that the new kid in town, ELA, the European Labour Authority, is already doing wonders in terms of trying to help the mobility at European Union level. All the agencies are really an important gems that we should value more. And for me, it's really a thrill to bring them all together on this particular debate. And I would like to thank them again for all their activity. And I really believe that they deserve a big round of applause even from the beginning for their activity. So I would certainly say that congratulations for your activity. And last but not least, of course, I mean, I've been working from the beginning of this mandate with the European Commission and with DG Employment. Yesterday, I've met Commissioner Nicolas Schmit. He is not only an amazing professional and a good colleague, he's also a good friend right now. And I think that we've achieved so many things together. And also, I would like to extend that to Jules Korte, to our Director General, that is overseeing for so much time this activity. And I see the way in which he is having the joy of pushing the agenda forward. I mean, that's really amazing. And I would like to extend that to all his colleagues in the European Commission. And with that, again, a little bit longer introduction, but I hope that it helped a little bit set the scene. And I would like to immediately pass the floor to Jules Korte with a big thanks again. Jules, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, dear Dragos, and well, you've given us already a lot of compliments, even though we haven't done anything today. So thank you very much. I'm really very happy to be here today, and that you managed again, like last year, to bring together the 5 agencies for which DG Employment is in some form or other responsible. Nicolas Schmid is very sorry that he couldn't make it. He has other commitments, but the directors will see him later in the day, and we will have another opportunity to also bring him into the discussion. So we have these 5 fantastic agencies, and the colleagues are here at the table. So we have Jürgen, Ivailo, Cosmin, William, and Pilvi. Some of the agencies are, I think, among the oldest ones, 1975, and then we have also the new kid on the block, ELA. So it's a diversity of places in Europe where they are, and also a diversity of tasks and a diversity of seniority, and it's an excellent mix. And I think it is very good that they are brought together again today by you, Dragos, to also display for the wider audience how relevant they actually are. They are very much, from my perspective, part of the family. Colleagues have actually looked a bit at the figures. If you add up the staff of these 5 agencies, there are 562 people working very much hand in hand with the staff of DG Employment, but also with many other services, and you will hear all that today, to come to an integrated approach to skills, which is the topic of today, but also on many other issues. And I think it is extremely important that this is shown and that we talk about it and that we have discussions about this. Of course, as you said yourself, the whole institutional landscape of the Union is now going to be in a big discussion. And if you look at the agencies, there are 5 in employment. I think in total there are more than 40 agencies in the European Union, and this shows also how important and how more and more relevant the Union is actually becoming, and how important the agencies, the 40 agencies, and they have over 12,000 staff altogether, how incredibly relevant they are for the action of the EU on the ground. They have a particular role, of course. They're all a bit different, but the big advantage is that they have expertise, as you said yourself. Also, I think they tend to be closer to the stakeholders, closer very often also to the member states through their management boards and governing boards, and also closer to the social partners. And therefore they are very useful for us, and very much part of the family. Now, on the European Year of Skills, the announcement was made last year by President von der Leyen, and I think it was a very good decision. And we're still in the middle of it. It's not over. It will actually continue until May of next year. And the important message there, that from my side, is to say that this is not only an issue that is discussed intensively in the bubble here. I think the good thing of the European Year of Skills is that it's also a fantastic vehicle and a platform to bring the message to where actually the skills need to be improved. And this is in the companies, in the regions, in the cities. And there, I think, is really the value of the skills. The other big change that I think the European Year of Skills has brought about is that the topic of skills has risen enormously on the political agenda. I mean, of course, we've always talked about skills, as you said, Dragos, and it's always been important. But it was more considered like, a nice to have, something that needed to be said, but nobody really believed in it. And from that position, very fast, it has risen to really the top of the strategic agenda of the European Union. If you read the speeches, if you read the conclusions of the European Council, it's there. And even an interesting speech that I saw of Christine Lagarde at Jackson Hole was talking a lot about this strategic relevance of people and the strategic relevance of investing in people and in skills. So I think we are there in the middle of a very important debate, which is of course coming under more and more pressure due to the extremely good, in fact, figures on the labor market, with unemployment below 6%. If you look at the average figure of the EU, this is a historic. I've never seen. I think it was 5.9%. Of course, there are always differences between the member states, so you have to be careful. But 5.9, combined with a vacancy rate that has never been so high, plus also, of course, a clear demographic trend, which shows that we are going to lose between now and 2050 every year in the working age, between 20 and 64, 1 million people. So 1 million people less every year between now and 2050, only because of the demographic trends. And that means, I think that is quite a stark figure, which shows how real the situation and how tense the situation on the labor market is and how it is going to stay, and hence how important it is to invest in the people. That's essentially my message. And the President of the Commission last week said a lot about this in her State of the Union. Again, the skills, the labor market, the shortages were one of the priorities she touched upon very intensively. And I think that when you talk about skills for people, this is an important part of that discussion. So I'm looking forward to a very interesting morning and to the presentations of all the colleagues. And thank you very much again for organizing this event.
Thank you very much, dear Joost. Before passing the floor and starting the panel, I would like to thank for the participation of the colleagues in the Council. We have also colleagues from the European Economic and Social Committee. We have the Vice President, Mr. Ploščan, was in the room. Yeah, he's back there. We have the World Bank, and we have many other institutions that we are working today. And also, I would like to greet the attachés to the EU and the Perm Reps that have joined us today. Without that, and without further ado, let me just introduce the first panel. I would like to thank very much Clara Drame for the moderation that she's going to have. So thank you very much for that, and please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much to both of you for your opening words. Hello and welcome from my side as well. My name is Clara Drame, and it's a pleasure to facilitate today's discussion. We already had a very successful discussion last year around the topic of young people, youth in Europe, and we will continue today's discussion in the field of skills, as you've already seen. Before we dive into the topic, I would like to do some housekeeping as a moderator. First of all, EU-OSHA has invited us to also talk about the exits of the room. This is something that should be more established during events. So I just want to let you know, please note the exits in the room, which you can find over there in case of an alarm going off, that you know where to go. Also, as you've already noticed, this event is being held in English. There's no translation available. We also want to say hello to the people joining us online. This event will be recorded and made available afterwards. And maybe you've already seen, we also have a photographer in the room whose pictures will also be made available later on online. We do want to encourage you to spread the discussion around skills also outside of this room, and one way to do that is to use social media. So you can use the hashtag of the year, European Year of Skills, as well as hashtag skills if you want to spread the news about this event and also the content which we will be discussing in your social media. Last but not least, the timing of today is quite tight. Still, we would like to give you a short break in between to grab some coffee, which will also allow us to transition to the next panel. And there is also a light networking lunch after our discussions where you can continue the informal discussions of the event. That's it for the housekeeping, and I would say let's now get started with the actual discussions. We've already heard that in times of green and digital transition, which is also known as twin transitions, the role of skills has evolved. But what really are skills? Maybe we should clarify that first before we jump into discussion. In current times, skills can actually become the currency of progress, of driving economic growth and social development. And when society and the environment are changing, I think it's quite evident that skills need to change as well. And this is one of the reasons why we are celebrating the European Year of Skills. And this is also why we want to explore the work of 5 EU agencies, Cedefop, Eurofound, EU-OSHA, ETF and ELA, to together discuss how Europe needs to respond to deep-rooted shifts in technology, society, demography, and how we can actually emphasize skills. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussions which we will be having, and I also want to already invite you to later on join the discussions during our Q&A sessions. And I especially want to also invite members of the Parliament to either ask a question or maybe even post a statement and to connect the discussions to their field of expertise. Having said that, let me introduce you our first panel. In our first panel round, we will focus on the topic skills for people, competitiveness, sustainability, a vision for the future. And as you can see, I already have the directors up here with me, and I will do a brief round of introduction, summarizing a bit your portfolios. First, I would like to start with Cosmin Bourgeois-Giu, who is Executive Director at the European Labour Authority. Previously, he has been ambassador, so he's a career diplomat who joined the Romanian Foreign Affairs Ministry in 1996. Also with us is the interim executive director of EU-OSHA, William Coburn, who worked prior to joining EU-OSHA in academic research investigating company safety culture. Also with us is Ivalo Calvin, also Executive Director of the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, also known as Eurofound. Mr. Calvin served as Bulgaria's Deputy Prime Minister on 2 occasions, as well as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister of Labor and Social Policy. Also with us is Jürgen Siebel, Executive Director of Cedefop. Mr. Siebel served for more than 20 years as an HR manager with global governance and business partner responsibilities at Siemens. And last but not least, the newest member in this round, Ms. Trosti, recently joined ETF as new director, and she also previously served as state secretary in 3 ministries in Finland: Ministry of Education and Culture, Minister of Employment and Economic Affairs, as well as Ministry of Transport and Communications. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Mr. Bourgeois-Giu, I would like to start with your perspective. We've already heard that ELA is quite a new agency, and we know that that you are tasked with the increasingly important topic of facilitating intra-EU labor mobility. So when we talk about skills, we also talk about enabling new pathways to the future. And when we do so, we also need to look at current challenges. And in the public debate, we repeatedly hear more about labor shortages and about challenges increasing in Europe's society, which also was mentioned during the opening. So I would like to ask you, from your perspective, do you agree with this observation of labor shortages increasing in Europe? And if so, where do you actually see the causes of these developments from your perspective? Please.
Thank you very much for these questions. Also, thank you to the chair, to the EMPL committee for organizing this debate. It is indeed very timely. To give a short answer to your question, yes, labor shortages are increasing in Europe. But we have some answers, and that's why I will expand with a longer version of my answer. First, by reiterating what is our role, what is our function at the EU level as a new EU agencies. We were established to facilitate and foster labor mobility in the EU in a fair and effective way. So we have several types of functions. One is very important to facilitate cross-border enforcement of rules. Another one is to foster cooperation between member states, European Commission, social partners in applying these rules. And another one very important is to provide information to people, to businesses about labor mobility, about opportunities for work in another country. So in this case, we have our function is works at 2 levels. two levels. One is the micro level, that of the individual. We have the mandate to facilitate the aspirations of people that want to work in a different country than their own, and to provide them information, to equip them with the necessary tools that they can fulfill these aspirations, and to practically support the freedom of movement as it is enshrined in the treaties. We also have a macro role. That is to support member states to address labor shortages and surpluses. And we do this analysis every year. And this is how, when we were set out, we looked at how we can become more effective at this. And we find out that it's not enough to match jobs, existing jobs, millions of jobs with people. We need to match them with the skills, with the people's skills. And that's why we need to go more granular into uncovering the skills of people. And that's what we do, and that's what we want to do in our establishment as we work to establish our operations, to go more granular, to find these skills and then to match them with the jobs available. Labor mobility is not a silver bullet to address labor shortages. That's why this discussion is important, because we have reskilling that could also move people from one sector to another. But when we talk about labor mobility across the EU, that is an important tool that is not fully explored. And that's why we want to bring EURES, which is the European Employment Service, to bring EURES more up to date with technology, to use it in a way that will empower people to discover their skills. And I will give one example that I give very often, and maybe you've heard it before from me. If a person that worked 20 years in a textile factory loses their job, if they will put in their CV just, I worked 20 years in a textile factory, it's just the textile industry that will look at her or him, and maybe they will not find a proper job afterwards. But if we help these people to discover what their skills are in a true way, to discover that, yes, they can work with minutious work, they can operate a complex machine, then maybe other industries could look at that person and maybe could find a job in automotive industry to work with a short training course to work on a line or production line on automotive. So that's what we want to do, to help, to use technology to help people uncover their skill, to empower them with this. And they will be more attractive to the labor market, and then the labor markets will be more flexible and will find more ways to adjust themselves and to cover for these shortages that are indeed increasing in Europe in many occupations. And we also will work on this. First, we want to work, and we will not do this ourselves. We want to partner, for example, in this case about skills, we want to partner with the European Commission. They are managing here, DG EMPL, managing the Europass. It's a very important tool for that. So we want to partner with these, so to specialize. So for them to do the profile builder, not only CV builder as it is right now, but profile builder, because as I said, we need to go deeper to uncover the skills and to empower people to discover their own skills. And then to do a better job matching that we do, to match better the jobs that are existing with these skills. And then also to work with other EU institutions, other EU agencies, with member states, to do a better job in assessing labor shortages and surpluses at the EU level.
And maybe let me come in there, because I would like to know from you what exactly would you propose to actually use the knowledge that, for instance, you with ELA have about existing shortages and surpluses. How can this knowledge be used to then better manage labor market imbalances in the future? Can you maybe give one concise example as well on what you would propose?
Yeah, we need to know better where are these shortages, in which occupations, what is the quantitative dimension of these shortages and surpluses, to be able to quicker and better deploy these instruments of job matching at the EU level, to occupy better the needs, the vacancy needs and the workforce needs. We talk about an architecture of employment that should exist at the level of EU, where first vacancies are occupied at national level. Whatever you cannot occupy at national level, you do this by reskilling, moving from other sectors, or by addressing the European level. This is where ELA and EURES come into effect. Of course, based on these shortages and the possibilities for labor mobility in the EU, if you cannot occupy, then you think of bringing workforce from outside of the EU. So it should be done in a more coordinated, structured way. And that's what we are working together with colleagues, both from the agencies, but also most importantly from the European Commission.
Thank you very much. I would like to transition to you, Mr. Coburn. We've just heard from Mr. Bourgeois that skills are not the silver bullet and not the solution for everything. Sometimes education and training are also only considered as a vehicle to increase labor productivity. However, they are also relevant or of great importance when it, for instance, comes to people's well-being, which is part of your agency's expertise. So I would like to ask you, how can skills and training ensure that workers are properly protected from injuries and ill health, especially when we look at challenges of the future?
Thank you, Clara. And first, I'd just like to say what a pleasure it is to be here and to thank Dragos, to thank the chair for organizing this session and all of you for filling this room and making it such a dynamic environment. In this company, EU-OSHA is a middle-aged agency. We were set up in 1996 in Bilbao, and we have three main areas of work. One is carrying out research, collecting data to support evidence-based policy making. Another one is supporting effective prevention of risks in the workplace through developing tools and guidance. And the third one is to raise awareness in general, and that's through our major awareness-raising campaigns. But coming back to your question, Clara, I think that it's evident that workers need skills, appropriate skills, to be able to carry out their jobs safely. The EU directives on occupational safety and health, starting with the Framework Directive, but many of the daughter directives, clearly establish a responsibility on employers to provide each worker with the necessary training that they're able to carry out their work in a safe and healthy manner. And the importance of this has been recognized recently with the ILO adding the right to safe and healthy working to the list of fundamental principles and basic rights. It's something that was picked up in the European Pillar of Social Rights as a principle. And of course, as I've said, it's something that is reflected in the EU-OSHA legislation. So the skills and training not only provide workers with an understanding of the health and safety risks in their job, but also of the rights they have. So that can be the right to information, the right to representation on occupational safety and health, the right to stop work in a dangerous environment, and also the rights that they are aware of what the obligations on their employers are in respect of their health and safety. Now, the statistics show us clearly that young workers and those who are new to the job are at particular risk. Workers aged between 15 and 34 have consistently higher risk of injury and early exposure to risk factors that will lead to serious illness. So OSH training is especially important for this collective at the beginning of the entry into the labor market, considering their lack of knowledge and skills at that stage. So these training programs, they can cover safe practices, safe working procedures. Workers learn not only how to perform their tasks in a manner that minimizes risks, such as operating machinery, handling hazardous materials correctly, but they can also learn about how to set up their workstation correctly in an office, so to avoid developing musculoskeletal disorders. And workers, when they have proper training, they're not only more aware of the potential dangers, but they're also more likely to report unsafe working conditions. And in that way, they contribute to health and safety overall. It's important to have training when starting a job, but research also shows that the earlier we acquire these skills and knowledge relating to occupational risks, the better is the outcome, not only for individuals, but also a bigger contribution to developing a positive prevention culture. So another important pillar is integrating workplace safety and health concepts into education, whether that's schools, whether that's vocational training or higher education. So by fostering partnerships between universities and OSH specialists, for example, a comprehensive understanding of occupational safety and health risks can be transferred to future professionals. And EU-OSHA, we've been working on this for some time, and you'll hear more about that later on this morning. In a similar sense, vocational education and training is an area where we believe that we can make an important contribution. And at EU-OSHA 4 years ago, we started an initiative, OSHVET, which was a project to promote cooperation between occupational safety and health and vocational education and training specialists. And under that initiative, we have integration of occupational safety and health in vocational training that allows both the students and the trainers and the teachers to get the skills necessary to address emerging risks associated with the technological and environmental transitions. And these types of approach are absolutely essential if the current and future workforce is going to have the skills needed for that changing world of work and to be able to confront the green and digital transitions.
Is it possible for me to maybe come in there and
sure.
to actually ask, because you're talking about new risk arising, and by, for instance, talking about home office setup and emergent risks that are there, we can see that this is a topic that is increasing in its importance. Can you give us some examples of some other new risks that are actually arising, and how you as agency would recommend, for instance, to act proactively in the field? Can you share some examples of that?
Yeah, I mean, we know from our survey that we carry out on workplace practices in management of occupational safety and health, that there's general lack of awareness amongst employers on the impact of digitalization. And we know that there's a general drop over time in participation in training amongst personnel in occupational safety and health. And it's absolutely core to the approach in the EU on occupational safety and health that managers are able to carry out risk assessments to identify and mitigate risks. And we develop an online interactive risk assessment tool that helps employers to do that. And for over 10 years, we've been developing these occupation and profession-specific tools. And we see how in vocational training they're being picked up to be able to improve the communication of OSH in vocational education and training. And we've actually added some functionalities to those tools to enable employers to manage those risks as well. Not only in the area of digitalization, but for example, if you're installing photovoltaic panels, well, the risks associated with climbing at altitude and working at altitude under risks of working on roofs, working with battery technology. This is something that's different for car repair shops, and OIRA is particularly used in small car repair shops, for example, in France. So we see some real practical impact.
Thank you very much for your insight, and you've already stressed we will have more discussions with experts from the agencies where we will dive a little bit deeper into the different aspects. Now I would like to come to you, Mr. Colvin, and actually also come back to the question of labor shortages. The European Year of Skills is actually a good occasion to dig a bit deeper and to explore and examine the reasons that we see behind the tight labor market. From your agency's perspective, what are different drivers apart from skills that are behind the lack of current labor supply in your perspective?
Thank you very much, Clara, and I would also start by thanking the chair of the Employment Committee and the Director General for the very nice words you said about the agencies this morning. Actually, this is quite a unique show because you see an issue, which is the skills seen from 360 degrees, I mean, from the different agencies with different points of view, complementing each other, and providing information, because the role of the agencies is not to take decisions, but to inform decision makers about what is happening on the ground and eventually suggest possible solutions. To your question, Clara, skills is much more than labor shortages. I mean, labor shortages, we have this current situation on the labor market. But we would be speaking about skills also if there is a high unemployment. Skills is something which is different from the fluctuations of the labor market. Certainly, this is one of the instruments to address it. But skills is rather part of the, should be part of the European DNA. I mean, they have to do with competitiveness. They have to do with well-being, if we still consider labor as a source of well-being. The skills is much broader than the current situation on the labor market, and this is what Eurofound's research also shows. For example, in our research, and this is over the years, we see a very clear correlation between the quality of the jobs and the shortages currently. I mean, in the areas of construction, agriculture, transport, hospitality, these are the areas with most of the shortages, plus IT, because of other reasons. But I would take these 4 sectors, and there are others, of course, where the job quality is much lower. And in our working conditions survey and exploring the working conditions, we have a pretty good and recognized definition about job quality. Skills is one of the elements of the job quality. Yes, they are very important in terms of job quality, but before training people to get to the jobs that are free now, you need to make these jobs attractive. So how to make the job attractive? How to attract the interest of the people that are not active or they are in other sectors to look at these sectors and to try to work in them. And this is where we go to the quality of jobs, which has several elements. Of course, pay is one of them, but not only. We have career perspectives, we have autonomy at work, we have the working conditions, both the physical conditions, the safety and health, but also the psychological conditions, etc., etc. Skills is part of the quality of a job, and we could say that for the time being, more or less, we have, I would say, a good training procedures in the companies. Only 4% of the European companies are not training their staff at all. About 34% are training less than 20% of the staff, and only 20% of the European companies are training on a regular basis annually more than 80% of the staff. And you know that this is one of the Porto targets of the EU. And I'll finish with this. Lastly, if you look at the structure of the training at work, then you see some worrying developments. Because you would see that women are less trained, people with disabilities are less trained, people on fixed-term contracts or temporary work are less trained. Maybe not surprising, but self-employed say that they learn more at work than employees. And higher skills workers and managers are more trained than lower skills workers. To give you just a figure about that, 72% of the managers, 78% of the high-skilled workers are trained on a regular basis, and only 37%, so this is half of this percentage, of the workers in low-skilled activities are trained. So you see gaps still very large, and these gaps have to be plugged.
And as I just said, these data, they actually put you as agencies in a position to, for instance, give policy recommendations or to inform policy interventions. Now, my question would be, since these are European issues, so we see similar trends on European level, how can we actually ensure that policy interventions at national level are aligned and complementary What would your perspective be on that? What types of interventions, for instance, are needed?
I think that we see quite a number of very active policies in terms of interventions. I mean, not to mention also this, to me, a revolution in the labor policy. I mean, the WHO program and the reaction after the huge shock of COVID to preserving the jobs. Somebody might say that this is one of the reasons for the shortages now, but I think that the positive economic and social effects are really very high. But basically, you have three strands how you could address this issue with shortages now. First is to activate the ones that are not active. I mean, we have still a number of people that are, and when I say number, I mean millions in Europe, that are not on the labor market because of different reasons. Being young, being at older age, being longer term in unemployment, being young parents that have to take care of their children, being people taking care of the elderly at home, etc., etc. They, because of different reasons, they cannot have access to the labor market. So this is the first cohort of people that could be addressed, of course, with different instruments. One of them, very essential, is the social services, something that Dragoș mentioned at the beginning, and the social investments. Second is the maximization of the use of skills. What we see in some companies, quite a lot of companies, skills are not fully used. I mean, you still have people working at different companies that don't feel that their knowledge and what they know is properly used in the company. So this could be done. I mean, training programs, etc., etc., and colleagues would speak much better than me about training at work also helps very much. And the third one is already the attraction of labor and the labor migration. And Cosmin talked already about the facilitation of cross-border movements and the migration of that. So if these three pillars are filled, and many of them are already filled with concrete actions, this is the way to address the fluctuations of the labor market.
Thank you very much. And you just referred to colleagues having more information on training and education, and that's why I would come to you, Mr. Siebel. Cedefop naturally has been involved in observing skill trends. You're the agency focusing on the development of vocational education and training. So I feel like you might have a good overview of the current state of the labor market and skill trends as well. So my question to you would be, how are current mega trends expected to evolve in the future? And what are challenges that you see arising for skills and jobs from your agency's perspective?
Yes, thank you. And also thank you for having us here. I want to jump right to your question, what sort of current megatrends are expecting to evolve. And here, I think the answer is, we'd be lucky if it were just the megatrends, but we live in a time where these megatrends combine currently with disruptions. Like we had the COVID crisis, we now have the war of aggression of Russia in Ukraine. And we have an energy crisis that now goes in there. So that makes Cedefop's work quite difficult because it is our mandate and our core business to see how megatrends combine and how they transform economies and how they transform our labor markets in the years ahead, and also what that implies for education and training systems and for skills. As they say, you know, knowing everything we can know about the future is the best way of preparing for it. And Cedefop's latest work confirms something that we've known for a long while, that the biggest challenge for Europe's labor market is actually coming from the supply side here, and it was mentioned by Joost already. Population aging is not new, but it's actually different than about 20 years ago, because it's showing, as Joost has mentioned, its enormous impacts on the labor market now more than ever. And our latest forecasts, skills forecasts, which look at the year 2035, they show that there's a continuous shrinking of the middle part of the workforce. So of what we call the prime-aged workers. William is from a prime-aged agency, and we're looking at prime-aged workers here. And to visualize this, think of a spinning top, you know, this toy that we all used when we were young. It's thin at the bottom and thin at the top, and there's a, it's very thick in the middle, because that stabilizes the spinning top. And so it is with workforces. And so if we lose these prime age workers more and more, we'll have no one to support the top and the bottom. We are seeing how now it gets thinner and thinner in the middle, and that also has the risks of making the system unstable. And while we cannot change these demographic trends, we believe that we can take action, and we can secure that also future workforces have a good middle part and prime-aged workers to help us shape and make these transitions that we're in successful. And here, three things I believe will do the trick. And Ivailo stole my thunder because they're exactly the same, but repetition, as you know, is the mother of belief. So first, we need to increase labor market participation, think females, needs, other groups that have been left out. Secondly, we need to really get serious on skills-based migration. And finally, we have to ensure that our workforce keeps up with the world of work that we now live in by providing, in particular, training in digital and transversal skills. And these are not, in our view, policy options. These are necessities. We simply cannot afford not to do these things. Will not work. And we need to shift from the drawing board, thinking about education and vet policies, more to implementation of these of our ambitions at large scale. And let me say a few words also on the demand side. And here our latest evidence shows that long discussed trends of skills polarization, growing demand at the top and the bottom ends at the expense of the middle, is now fully taken over by a different kind of mega trend that we call skills upgrading. This means that we'll see a growing demand for services and jobs requiring higher level skills, and that employment in jobs requiring low skills will decline. And these trends reflect the impacts of digitalization, of automation, and of implementing the European Green Deal. They mean more demand for high-skilled labor, and in fact, almost all new jobs that will be created until 2035 will require higher-skilled individuals to fill them.
Let me maybe, come
please.
in there, because I have a question very much related to that. You just talked about taking actions, and you just mentioned the Green Deal. The European Commission has set several ambitions to take actions. The Green Deal is one of them, but also the European Skills Agenda or the Digital Decade Framework. How would you say, do these need to interact with each other? How can we actually combine the impact of these ambitions to really tackle the challenges which you just addressed?
I'll try, but let me close the point on the developments, because I think then it becomes apparent what will need to happen to get the various influences on what we need to do in check. So what I wanted to say in this upgrading game is that automation and energy transition will impact the middle and some low-skilled jobs negatively. So we have positive effects, negative effects, but we have to watch out. There's actually no need to panic that everybody who is low-skilled or medium-skilled will all lose their jobs, because it's the new jobs, and they only account for about 10% of job openings in the next 10 to 15 years. And about 90% of the jobs will be driven by replacement demand. So you see how demography and the transitions both impact how labor markets will develop. And we have this huge retirement wave, which will create a lot of replacement demand, even in jobs where we believe they may become obsolete in the future. So is that good news? Well, not really, because we need to respond to what's happening also within the jobs, not only at occupational level. And here we need to see a skills transition, and this has to be, based on the fact that the needs inside the jobs for instance, digital skills is growing fastest in low-skilled occupations. So we really, it's highly complex, if you will, and therefore I really think that the year of skills or skills as such is a worthy cause for this year. If we get the skills right on the supply and the demand side, then we can really fix and address those labor shortages that were talked about, but we can also contribute decisively to meeting the Green Deal objectives, and we can manage the fair transition. So really, as we say today, for people, for competitiveness and for sustainability. Now to your question on, how do the various activities and policy initiatives combine. I think nobody can really tell what the future will be. So I can only try, and we also try at Cedefop to, estimate impacts of these different ambitions coming from different programs and initiatives. And thankfully, we have some methods and tools to reflect those possible futures. Take Cedefop's work on the green transformation. Just before COVID, we used the Green Deal skills forecast scenario to look at possible impacts on employment, assuming that the Green Deal objectives are being met and fully implemented. And then we clearly can see that this will be a job engine. So the Green Deal itself will create about 2.5 million jobs across the EU. Even better, jobs would be created across the entire skills spectrum if we implemented the Green Deal objectives. That's always the big if here. This will literally bring jobs for everyone. And of course, we must be careful as to also the need to ensure that we create quality jobs. Ivailo has said this. It's not only about jobs as such, but also quality jobs. And we need to be aware where there could be winners and losers. Think regions, think certain sectors, especially brown sectors, etc. And then furthermore, while realizing those green and digital ambitions that the EU has in its various policies, while this is possible, we still need to step up our efforts in giving people the skills that they need to make the transitions happen. And what we need, in fact, is a skills revolution. An evolution will simply not do.
And I think with today's discussion, we are mapping different aspects which could be part of such a revolution. Now, to conclude this round of discussion with the directors, I would like to come to you, Ms. Torsti. ETF is that one agency that brings a geographic, but of course also thematic aspect to the discussion. I would like to broaden really the perspective of the points made by the previous directors now with your perspective. Why would you consider the global dimension of human capital development to be actually crucial to the EU? How does this dimension contribute to changing the role of skills, as we just heard from the other agencies?
Thank you very much, Clara, and I can echo all the thanks expressed, and also thank William and Jürgen to allow me to see that, yes, we are the prime agency standing on its feet, knowing its expertise and looking eagerly towards the future challenges, which are many, as has been mentioned. To the question, why it's important for the European Union to look also outside, as ETF works on the thematic and geographical crossroad of human capital development thematically, and working with countries in the neighborhood, but also beyond, also then therefore serving the external services, as our mandate says. So I think I would say three key elements. First one is obvious, but it needs to be stated. It's of course the whole geopolitical context. We have seen quite an important change in several ways. We have the enlargement agenda that is not only the 3 new countries, but also with the Western Balkans. So we live in a different type of European landscape. And there, of course, all these countries have been partner countries of ETF for a long time. Ukraine was mentioned, one of our really key countries since 1995. There is, of course, also not only the Ukraine and the enlargement, but also the approach to Africa we have taken as the Union, and that has brought new agendas and strategic level, which we will hear more in this afternoon from our expert. So there is a need to be present, understand as the Union. The second, related to the previous, is the perspective of these third countries and regions that I believe is important to understand when we in particular look at, for instance, the dimension of jobs and skills. And that is what ETF looks in various ways And I like the title of today because it helps me to describe our principle. So it's people, it's looking at individuals, it's competitiveness, it's looking at the union in a sense of also receiving people who have skills and qualifications. And it's the sustainability, it's looking at the perspective of the third countries. So we have to always remember this threefold approach. And finally, why, of course, when we are here together on the title of skills, so it relates to perhaps the themes of our time: migration, mobility, and sustainability. And in all these, we are looking at the recognition of skills in enormous youthful populations of our neighboring regions, most of them in quite fragile situations. So to understand those dynamics and what the skills developments really needed are and analyze that carefully is, of course, critical also for the future of the Union.
Can you maybe, from a practical point of view, give us some examples of how you are working or collaborating with countries and regions outside of the EU, just to make it a bit more tangible?
Of course, yes. The work of ETF is divided in a way to three segments: being a knowledge hub, doing monitoring and assessment, and doing policy advice. And if you look at just from that angle, as a knowledge hub, so for instance, the skills anticipation work, to give an example recently and also a collegial example, we did, for instance, in 10 countries, sector studies about the skills, and then with Cedefop, the skills and job survey in 5 countries, using the same methodology as Cedefop uses in the member states, to then allow those countries to have that sort of knowledge as part of their decision making. On the level of the monitoring and assessment, we do something called Torino process in all countries where we work, where we look at really the systems, their performance, funding, and thereby are able again to do very robust evidence-based recommendations for those countries on one hand, but for instance also for the Commission strategies on the other hand. And to give just policies at work, perhaps 1 or 2 examples. There is a center, a network of vocational centers of excellence across the globe now, about 270 members in 40 countries, whereby you again have mechanisms that allow these different centers to see what is vocational excellence, how do they match the skills needs that are actually analyzed through the knowledge hub work. And then there is, of course, the work in Ukraine. In the first months after the war and the aggression of Russia had started, ETF was able actually to produce mechanisms whereby the qualifications could be recognized. Now we are looking into long term, of course, as well, as there is country intelligence and thematic intelligence on the field of skills, education and training, as said, almost about 30 years. So it allows, in a way, this expertise to be looked in the future. And I would close by saying, always keeping in mind this sort of perspective of individuals, European perspective, and the third country perspective, and trying to find balance in that. Thank you.
Thank you very much to you, but also thank you again to all directors for the opening discussion. You quite set the ground and gave us an introduction into many different aspects of the topics which we will later dive deeper in with the experts. I would now like to conclude this discussion and actually give you as audience the possibility to digest what you've just heard. And again, we will have the experts from the different agencies coming in for the next panels where we will dive deeper into several different aspects. And then we will also give you the opportunity to ask questions once to the experts, but of course, later on, you can also address the directors if you have a specific question about what they've been discussing. So thank you again for joining us. And I will now give you 5 minutes of break. So we will be back here, continuing with the next panel at 17 past. I'm German, so timing is quite important to me. 5 minutes. Thank you. Okay, I would like to ask everybody to return back to their seats so that we can continue. Please return back to your seats. Please, everybody, return back to your seats so that we can continue with the second panel discussion. Okay. Welcome back, everybody, after this very brief break. I know that you're all eager to start networking and to continue bilateral discussions. Unfortunately, we do have a very tight schedule today, which is why we now have to continue with the second panel. Okay. Once again, welcome back after this brief break. As you can see, the topic of the second panel discussion is about getting the right balance, skills the EU needs to meet the demands of the labor market in a green and digital transition. I'm very happy to have now different speakers with me on stage, 3 experts, which I will introduce to you in just a minute. With the experts, we would like to dive deeper into some of the aspects the directors have already mentioned, and they all have different expertise, but what we can see quite well, hopefully also in the discussion in this panel, is the interconnection and interconnectiveness between the different agencies and their work. So let me now introduce to you the speakers. First, we have Irene Mandl, who is Head of Information at Euros Unit at ELA. Also with us is Elias Livanos, who is expert from the Department for VET and Skills at Cedefop. And we have Tina Weber, who is Research Manager at Eurofound. Thank you to the three of you for joining us. Ms. Mandl, I would like to start with your perspective. In the first panel, we already, and also in the opening actually, we already talked about the role of labor shortages. ELA has surveyed, as I know, EU member states to identify existence of labor shortages. So you have more insight on what actually causes the labor shortages and how they do look like right now. I would like to ask you which occupations in Europe are right now considered as having severe shortages, and how do they actually differ by skill level? Do we see any connection there?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yes, indeed. So what we're doing in the framework of our role as the European Coordination Office as EURES is to do a mapping across the EURES countries, which is the EU27 plus additional 4, on a yearly basis to identify where are the shortages and where are the surpluses. And what we see there are a few common occupational groups which tend to be on shortage, and those are referring mainly to the construction sector, to engineering crafts, to IT and software development, but also healthcare. And they are quite structural over the years. What is new comparatively recently after the lifting of the COVID restriction is that we also see more and more shortages in the field of hospitality. Interestingly, as said, while they are quite common across all these 34 countries, we do see differences between the north and the south of Europe and the east and the west of Europe, but also within regions. And very striking here is that regions which are less developed or which are not as good equipped with educational facilities, they suffer more from these labor market imbalances. And I think this is also an important sign already on the topic of skills. So while it was mentioned in the previous panel that the shortages are caused by a combination of different factors caused by employers and employees, from working conditions to other elements, skills is an important topic. So we see here on the one hand that their skills could be outdated, notably driven by elements like digitalization, technological developments. On the other hand, there could be a need for completely new skills due to completely newly emerging occupations, for example, as driven by the development of greenings. But then there is also another dimension that is not so much discussed, which is the spatial one. So it could well be that it's more a skills mismatch rather than a skills lack or a skills shortage caused by the fact that the skills might be available, but the people are not on the spot where the employers would need them. Now, on the basis of the level of skills, when these discussions are made, it's mainly talked about the high flyers, the elite on the labor market, PhDs and what have you. What our research finds is, yes, sure, they are needed, but the vast majority of those occupations that are on shortage are rather characterized by medium skills level as well as vocational skills. And personally, I think this is a good message because it gives hope for the workers that they can acquire and maintain the skills that are needed in the future, as well as a good message to the employers that with some effort, it is possible to get the skills that are needed. But I made the point about effort, so it doesn't come automatically. So there should be joint efforts by everyone. It should be the workers willing to continuously learn and update and reskill if needed. It should be the employers that are investing in skilling of the workforce. It should be social partners, member states, institutions that facilitate this process. So that it's really a joint effort that we make sure that the skills are needed not only today, but also tomorrow will be here.
And to actually connect to the aspects you just mentioned, Mr. Livanos, I would like to ask you, as Cedefop, do you see similar trends actually to what Ms. Mandl just identified? And what did you identify as drivers that maybe can influence the appearance or disappearance of labor shortages? Because I believe that's also something your research focuses on.
Thank you for the question. As you know, at Cedefop, we look into the future given that we have the skills forecast. And in fact, we have developed a new indicator called future shortage indicator. And there we're trying to identify 3 areas that they could cause a shortage. The first one comes from the demand, so increased demand for some goods and services affecting the jobs that they will be in need. But then there is a supply, and we know that the replacements will create 9 out of 10 total job openings to 2035. So it is very important to keep in mind how old is a sector, how old is an occupation, because they may cause a shortage in the future. And then there are the imbalances that we need to, and we do look into our work, because there we're trying to see what would be the demand for skills in the future in terms of education and how this will be met by the available supply. So we put all this together, then we're trying to see what are the implications about the shortages for the future. And I will give you a couple of examples. We talk about the digital transitions, and we know that there will be increased demand for these occupations and this sector. And this could create shortages for some occupations like cyber security experts, big data analysts, and so on. And they could cause hard to fill vacancies. But when we look at this, the sector, we see that, first of all, it's not an old sector, so it's not aging very fast. So that means that the existing workforce will help the future a lot. And it's not big in size, so it will not create many replacement needs. And the good thing when we look about imbalances is that Europe is obtaining and acquiring high skills. So maybe we need to direct people into the right specializations, but the high skills will be there to adapt to this challenge. And this is a very positive message. Now, if I take another example and we look, for example, at the health sector, so we talk about health professionals, associate professionals, so that's at the high skill level, medium skill level, and even at the care sector in general. Then we see that first, there is an increased demand for these occupations, and that could cause a shortage because we have COVID, and we know that that Europe is aging, so there will be higher demand for taking care of people who are aging, of course. Then when we look at the replacement, we see that it is also a very old sector, so there will be many replacement needs for the future, and it's also a big sector, so the numbers will be very high. If we think about imbalances, we have to be careful because the health sector and all the occupations inside, first of all, they need specific education, which could be very costly. It needs specific infrastructure. And you also need to convince people to follow up this education. So it is something that should be taken into consideration when thinking about shortages. And when we look at the data and the analysis we have done, we actually see that there is a tendency of highly skilled medical professionals to work in lower skilled jobs. I give you a very simple example, like a qualified doctor may be working as a nurse. It sounds a little bit crazy, and we know that doctors are in shortage everywhere. So this is not because we have an oversupply of doctors, but then we need to think what is underneath, and it could be the working conditions, the pay may not be satisfactory, the level of responsibility may not be good for the people to take up these jobs. And another point that we can make is that now tasks in occupations, they're broader, like the tasks that a nurse does, or maybe a technician does, let's say, could be the same as the task of a doctor, and the technician could do tasks that an engineer could do. So we need to think a little bit broader. But even so, when we derive the estimations and we see what is the score for each occupation, we need to think, and we need to give specific weights. And I think we have 3 points to consider. First of all is the type of education needed. Some occupations, they need specialized education, like the doctors, for example, that are very lengthy compared to an economist, for instance. We need to think about the technical skills, and I'm talking about the special crafts, because they're not easy to be replaced. And here the role of vocational education and training and apprenticeships is really important. And then the personal skills. And this is the case for the care sector, for example. We need people who are taking care of other people. So we need to be specialized. And finalizing my intervention, this is important just to make a point, because if we just look at the numbers and the volume, we'll end up saying that the number one shortage occupation is cleaners and helpers. But maybe this is not a skill shortage that should be so much worried about, but of course we need to do something about it. I stop. Thank you.
We will be coming back to a few of the aspects that you just mentioned lastly, but we now had Ms. Mandel talk about skill level and affected occupation. You identified certain drivers. The question is now about what effective measures could we actually take. And Ms. Weber, in 2021, Eurofound actually did a survey, the European Working Conditions Telephone Survey, where it was shown that labor shortages are particularly prevalent in sectors with poor job quality. So that also quite well connects to what you just said. And what we can see there is, for instance, gender segregation in the health sector, which Mr. Libanos also just talked about. My question to you now is what effective measures can we actually use to tackle these shortages from the research? What did you come up with?
Thank you, Clara. Indeed, you're right. The European Working Conditions Telephone Survey showed that it's occupations like health and care, like the transport sector, like construction, that tend to suffer from more challenging working conditions, for example, in relation to working antisocial hours, having less flexibility to change your working hours, having less geographical flexibility, but maybe also facing issues like violence and harassment in the workplace. So those are clearly sectors that face recruitment challenges. There are also others like ICT, where there are labor shortages as well, that have generally better working conditions. So in order to understand a little bit better what kind of policies are effective, we carried out a meta-evaluation of policies at national level that are addressed to tackling labor shortages and that have already been evaluated at the national level. So what did we find from those evaluations? And I think the main message I draw from that research is what is effective is the kind of policy that understands the underlying drivers of the labor shortage. So if it is indeed working conditions, you need to have a measure that effectively tackles the attractiveness of that job. And of course, people might immediately think about pay. And of course, pay is an important factor. And just to give an example, there are a number of countries, we've already talked about doctors and the healthcare sector, that have tried to raise wages in that sector, and where there has been an impact on the number of doctors seeking recognition for their qualification to work in another member state. So there is some impact of these types of measures, but still, when you do that, it is not sufficient to attract, for example, more doctors into more rural areas. So there are other elements at play, other considerations around working conditions. So for example, what are your opportunities for training, for progression? How attractive are the living conditions in that particular area? So not just about pay, but also giving the opportunity maybe for greater flexibility in selecting shift patterns, working hours. There are some examples around that have worked well. You mentioned the gender segregation, and there are initiatives in a number of countries, let's say take the care sector again, of trying to attract more men into the care sector. They're kind of few and far between. There are far more initiatives trying to attract women into ICT. And again, they have been shown to be effective in raising the number of women going into this kind of training. But what they sometimes find is women enter that profession and then they don't stay, because those sectors tend to be still male dominated. Maybe that impacts on the way work is organized, and then women leave again. So once in the workplace, there are then also other measures that need to be taken. And then finally, when the shortages are more qualitative, so when there is a mismatch between the skills needed by the labor market and the skills of the job seekers, then the really key message is that all key actors, and I mean social partners, training providers, need to be involved in the regular updating of the curricula, of the training provision, to make sure that there is a better match.
And that's also a perfect transition to what I would like to ask you. I would like to sharpen a bit the perspective and to actually look at right now specifically the digital transition. As you said, skills need to evolve. Also the actors, stakeholders involved in providing skills need to evolve. So Mr. Livanos, looking at the current state of play and the skills needed in the EU with the perspective of digital transition, where do you currently see gaps, skill gaps that need to be filled?
Thank you for the question. I think I would like to put forth like a broader perspective, because we do talk a lot about skills and about skill needs. And typically what we do is that we focus on the skills development part and the skills training. So we think about how we can affect the supply. And this is important because we think about the initial continuous education, formal, non-formal, lifelong learning, and vocational education and training and so on. But I think the point is that it is more than that we need to focus on. For example, we need to think about how smooth is the transition from education to the labor market. Like, how fast do graduates find a job? This is something that we need to pay attention. Or how inclusive is the labor market? How many people decide to enter the labor market? And those that they don't, why don't we help them? If you like, the institutional framework is really important. And then there is what we discussed today, which is the matching, like how the skills that have been developed and they have been activated into the labor market, they're then utilized at work. For instance, has somebody found a job responding to the skills that he or she has studied? These are very important questions. And what we have done at Cedefop, we have developed a composite indicator, namely the European Skills Index, which is looking into 3 different aspects that I just described: skills development, activation, and matching, and is trying to capture the performance of a skill system overall. And then you may ask me, okay, and why it is important to see the skill system as a whole? Well, we talk about the twin transition, and this is linked to your questions. And what we see is that a well-developed skill system is closely linked to advancing new green technologies or use of more renewable sources of energy. So we see that the green transition is going through a solid skill system. And we see the same with the digital transition, because the countries that they have better skills development and activation, they had higher work from home potential. And this made them resilient during COVID. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that really skills is the vehicle to go through the transitions. But in order to achieve skills, we need to think on a wider perspective, capture what is a skill system, and then try to influence all the little parts of it. Thank you.
Ms. Weber, would you agree with the points Mr. Livanos just made? You already introduced also the green transition as also being quite relevant to the changes happening right now. What impacts do you see to be very likely to unfold across sectors, also occupations, with these changes coming?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was listening with great interest to Director Siebel and his account of Cedefop's research on the green transition. It's a good example of how in research, as in everything else, the devil is in the detail, because Eurofound did its own assessment of the impact of, in this case, the Fit for 55 package and its impact on overall employment and also within different regions, occupations, on the basis of gender. And this research actually found that the additional impact of the Fit for 55 package is an additional job creation of around 200,000 jobs. But that doesn't take into account that in other projections, the implications of the Paris Agreement are already taken into account. So the number is lower, but we were looking at something else. But maybe from a sectoral perspective, what was interesting is that there's going to be likely a positive impact on sectors like construction and services, whereas the more negative impact is on the manufacturing sector, the agricultural sector. But again, here you have to be specific, because in manufacturing, all the tasks related to the manufacture of things like photovoltaic panels, anything else to do with the green transition is obviously going to see an increase. Maybe in relation to countries and regions, there will also be a difference. So we expect a more positive impact on Southern Europe, a somewhat more negative impact on Eastern European countries, where the brown sectors are still more prevalent. And then in terms of gender, in general, potentially a more positive impact for female workforce because of this increase in the service sector. But again, the balance in increase and reduction of the Fit for 55 scenario is a more likely negative impact on men, but also some positive impact for those working in the construction sector. So you have to really look at the granular detail and understand what in particular sectors and occupations the impact is going to be.
And this also quite well emphasizes why it's so important to have the different agencies focusing on various aspects of the topic. And for instance, ELA also has a great level of detail. I know that as well from your research. And you, for instance, Ms. Mandel, looked into specific occupations and found out that in one country they could be in a shortage, in another country they could be in a surplus, and so on. So again, we see very different findings and observations in the field. Now, the question is, because we are still at the topic of measures and how can we take actions, how can we actually use these findings, all the information, maybe also from all agency, to be picked up for policy interventions? What would your recommendation be?
Thank you. Well, starting with the point that you just made, as you said, our research found about 300 cases where there would be a theoretical possibility of alleviating a shortage in an occupation in one country with a surplus in the same occupation in another country. And I think there is just no awareness about it. So what policy could make here is inform both job seekers, employers, but also intermediaries like social partners about that there are these opportunities and there would be this possibility of helping through labor mobility to tackle that. But then again, it doesn't come automatically and it's only a theoretical opportunity. So what again needs to come with it is provision of information, provision of active support to the job seekers, to the employers, to find each other and to make it then also happen, and to particularly for the worker who is moving, to help them to at the end start a probably completely new life in another country, taking on a job there. And that's something that policy can support and which policy is already supporting, for example, through the EURES network. We're talking here about a network about 250 institutions in 31 countries with a network of about 1,000 local advisors who give direct support, face-to-face advice and recommendations to job seekers and employers. Another point that was mentioned is, for example, as we know from research, as also Ms. Weber has mentioned, there is still gender segregation in what is happening in regards to these labor market imbalances. We see that women are overrepresented in surplus occupations and underrepresented in shortage occupations, and that in spite of all the activities that have already been done. So here also, again, more work might be needed. Another dimension that could be looked at is age of the workforce. We see that a good number of the shortages occupations are characterized by a very old workforce. So that means that in future, this problem will very likely aggravate when these people go to retirement and we don't have enough young people to follow up on that. So again, we would need to find out why are these people not going to these occupations, but choose a different career path. What is the driver behind that, to then come up with a very tailored approach of policy, as also was mentioned by previous speakers. And last but not least, I would like to mention that at the end, information is key for everyone. I think there is a lot of research already going on, but we still need to learn more. I think there is need for more detailed, more granular data on what is needed, how could it be filled by whom, what is available on the labor market. So further improvement of labor market intelligence as a basis for informed policy making, I think, is key. And ELA does have here a legal mandate through EURES to regularly provide information on labor market imbalances. And we are very ambitious of further improving the methodology as well as the availability of the data, the presentation, to make it easy to digest and to understand for everyone who might be interested in that. And we hope that we are not on our own in that, but that we can cooperate with our sister agencies here, as well as with Eurostat, the member states, and any other actors who would be useful here. Thank you.
So this is clearly an invitation also for you to take a look at the work of the agencies. And of course, also we saw a great connection to your last point made to last year's event, where we talked about the role of young people in the labor market and employment. And you did also last year make some good recommendations on how young people can be empowered in that sense. So please also look at the recording, maybe if you're interested in that topic of last year's event. Thank you very much for your points made in this panel round. We would now like to come to the Q&A session, where we encourage you to also take the floor, ask questions. Please, if you would like to ask a question, then raise your hand, share your name and institution you are representing. Before I come to the audience, I will come to the two of you in just about a second. I would like to give the floor to MEP Sarah Mathieu, who already in advance did pose a statement or question for this panel. So please, Ms. Mathieu, would you please take the floor?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks for enlightening us with this very important information. I think it's very apt that we have this European Year of Skills. I think it's clear that we need to raise the awareness when it comes to everything to do on this very important topic. Just a couple of questions, maybe to link this a little bit also to the work, of course, that we're doing here in the Parliament. I'm sure that you're aware we are talking about the Net Zero Industry Act, of course, also linked to this green and digital transition. And one of the proposals that the Commission came up with are these Net Zero Academies that are supposed to support also the curriculum and skills needed within those net zero industry sectors. How do you see the role of that new initiative? Do you think it will make a difference? One of the things I was also wondering, I'm a rapporteur on an INI specifically on green jobs and just transition. One of the things that we find would be quite important is to really have a legal individual right to education, training and lifelong learning, and that this should also include a paid educational leave to make sure that that training doesn't impair the workers' rights to rest or their salary. And we think it would be important to actually anchor that within a directive on lifelong learning. Do you think that that would be a step in the right direction and helpful? And then maybe finally, you mentioned quite some hurdles as well when it comes to inclusiveness and gender. I'm wondering, are there specific measures that could be taken to make skills more, well, training and skilling more accessible? like childcare, like a minimum income that is above the poverty threshold, so people can actually find the time to do those kind of trainings. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your questions. I would post these questions, pass on these questions to the panel, please, because of time, and we do have other speakers wanting to take the floor as well. Please keep your answers short and concise. Ms. Mandel, would you like to start?
Thank you. Yes, I start with the last point. I said I think a lot has already been happened to make this gender segregation less prominent, but still a lot is to do. I think examples, as you mentioned, like childcare or whatever, they are certainly good. But I think we should start even earlier. In my opinion, there is still a lot of stereotypes in the mindset of people of this is a job for girls, this is a job for boys. So starting here in the framework of socialization, maybe even as early as kindergarten, and make the girls play with cars and the boys with dolls and issues like that might help. So I think it's also a matter of social policies and family issues because in many cases, the career pathway is kind of coming and decided through the families and how the child or the young person, when they are deciding for the job, is going there. And to keep concise, I think I stop here and leave the others the room.
Thank you. Mr. Livanus, please.
Yes, so my very short answer to your questions would be yes, yes, and yes. The first point about supporting the curriculum, this is how you take it to the next level. I think we've reached a stage that the skills intelligence that we have available through all the agencies, it goes to a great level of detail. Of course, people always want more detail, but it is the time to translate it into something that will make a difference. So including this information and shaping the curriculum, it is the right thing. That's a clear yes. The next 2 points is very much linked to what I talked about before. It's about skills activation. It's not only about skills development. Yes, we need to target groups that are, let's say, underprivileged, if I may say, because this is a way to get more people into the workforce. We heard earlier that the workforce is aging, that the prime age workers, they're reducing in sizes. And in any case, there is not much we can do about them because the participation rate is already 95%. We cannot do anything. But when we look at other groups, like underprivileged groups, we see that the participation to the labor market is really low. So we need to utilize, given the demographic trends, it is a chance that we have there. So yes, activation through working conditions and through targeting specific groups will be really essential. And for me, it will be the way forward. Thank you.
Last but not least, Ms. Weber, please.
Yes, on your question on the net zero academies, I think it's an interesting proposal because one of the things we found in the policies on green skills was that in a lot of countries, this seems to be still at the development stage. So many of the initiatives we found were still trying to establish what are the skills that are going to be needed. I mean, we talk about green jobs, but all the jobs are greening now. So everyone needs to have some level of skill. But yeah, we're still at the phase of developing curricula. And if that could be done in a more time efficient and regular manner with the involvement of all the relevant actors, that would certainly be beneficial. On the access to lifelong learning, it's crucial, particularly for those individuals where also our European Working Conditions Survey over the years, not only the most recent one, shows that there is a lack of access or less access given to certain groups. So individuals on fixed time, temporary contracts, those who have lower skills, older workers. So yeah, more needs to be done to open up that access. And on the gender issue, yes, certainly for unemployed women, who need to access training and in order to be able to enter the labor market. More support needs to be available for any care responsibilities that might be a barrier to them entering employment. And again, for those that are in employment, we also know that women are more likely to work part-time. Part-time workers are less likely to have access to training. So yes, that needs to be addressed. And work-related training obviously needs to be offered during during working hours.
Thank you very much for your answers. I did see 2 hands over there, so please first take the floor. And I would like to ask you to pose your question to one of the speakers so that we can have one more question afterwards.
Sure. Thank you very much. My name is Panayotis. I work for Organizing Bureau of European School Student Unions, so BESU. I'm very happy that we have this chance to actually have a discussion versus the previous session. But what I would really like to focus is 3 points, which are focusing mainly for Eurofound. We see a lot of reference to the future, to how the process is going to be with the twin transition, but we lack any reflection or data from the side of today's event on social investment. What does that mean? What do we mean by quality of work? It was mentioned earlier, thankfully, but we do, or from my perspective at least, we do lack how this transition will be more democratic and engaging, especially when it comes to education and training. A culture of democracy and participation from the educational side, from our side to secondary education, but also what about counseling? What about curricula? How can we shift this transition in a more participatory and meaningful way? Also thinking about the council recommendations about the holistic approach on lifelong learning. We don't see many mentions on that, and I'm quite sure you have a lot of data when it comes to this process. But also thinking about the intergenerational aspect. How do we cover the transition from education in school to higher education or to employment, but at the same time, without having a whole school approach, while we're talking about Green Deal, while we're talking about digital education action plans and all these things, while the system is not yet up to date, while our social investment is not still by member states up to the level that it can cover these needs of lower skills or either sectors. Like I remember a doctor, and I'm wrapping up with this, a doctor from Germany said, if they switch electricity or we have a problem with electricity, energy crisis, the doctors are powerless. How can we cover this gap of what the institutions are discussing today versus the needs we have on our education and training? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would give Ms. Weber a few more minutes to sort her answer to that question, and would like to take a second question for one of the other panelists.
Thanks very much, Chair. My name is Justin Sinnott, and I'm from the Further Education Authority in Ireland called SULIS. Just 2 quick points. One is, I suppose, a lot of discussion this morning has been on the challenges we face going forward. I suppose the big one for me will be, what role do you see employers in all this, and in particular the small and medium enterprise employers, because I suppose the big challenge for an employer is the fact that it's time, and time is precious to certainly say an employer who has a small workforce. And I suppose the other thing is, I suppose the speed of change and economic challenges in Europe have been massive, and they were briefly described this morning, the kind of the seismic events we've gone through over the last decade. And I suppose, where do we see kind of the role of transferable skills and all that? Because, you know, one of the things that we've seen, certainly from an Irish perspective, where we went through quite a large economic shock over a decade ago in terms of construction, having to try and reskill and retrain our people to try and actually do new jobs and new roles. And then you see, you know, those old skills around construction coming back into vogue again. So it's how do we keep the system nimble? How do you actually ensure that the skills that we're providing for people, that they can be used and they can be transferred elsewhere? Because I think that's a major challenge going forward, because, you know, future-proofing skills is a very, very difficult challenge. Thank you.
Please. Thank you very much. Then first, Ms. Weber, and I'm sorry, I know these questions are very broad. Still, I would like to ask you to keep your answers short.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Maybe we need to have a more detailed discussion in the break about what you mean by social. Sorry? Yes, it's on. Yeah. Okay. What exactly you mean by social investment? I think what we do look into at Eurofound is when you speak about the democratic process of also defining lifelong learning and curricula is the level of engagement of social partners in particular, but also training institutions in that curriculum development, whether it's a regular ongoing or an ad hoc process. And I think certainly there is a difference in outcomes, I would say, when you have a more regular structured process in place. And in terms of counseling in the transition from school to the labor market, it's probably something that Cedefop is looking into in more detail as well. But certainly that responsibility for counseling lies with different agencies in different member states. And therefore, the level of investment is also going to be different. So certainly you're right that there are differential implications from member state to member state, but maybe we can have a chat in the break so I can understand a bit better the actual data that you're looking for.
That's a good reference to the light networking lunch that we will have right after the event. And I would now like to give Ms. Mandel the floor to respond to the second question.
Thank you. Well, that had two parts. To start with the first one, the role of the employer. As I mentioned, I would see that everyone has a role, every one of the different actors. It should not be the responsibility for a single actor, which means I also would like to pose some responsibility for that on the employers. And I take the point, yes, it is an investment. As an employer, you have to be able to afford investing in training. But at the same time, I would like to ask the question, as an employer, can you afford not to train your workforce? Would you remain competitive? And getting back to the topic of SMEs, in statistics, that doesn't really feature that they are doing a lot actually in terms of workforce skilling, because what is happening in SMEs is a lot of on-the-job training, informal, non-formal training, and also that has an important value. And I think that also links to your second question. I think there are two different skill sets needed. On the one hand, you have like the technical, the content one, and then I think we should need to explore more how we can skill people in terms of adaptability, notably with those emerging jobs where we do not yet know what might be needed in a couple of years. So to get better, everyone literally of us to be open and to adapt what is needed in the future. And again, I think that could be something where SMEs might actually be more successful than the bigger companies because it's their daily life.
One very brief addition from you, Mr. Livanos. I know you also wanted to respond to that question.
Thank you. So I think what is important to consider is that, as with the skill system, when it comes to skills development, there is no single owner. Like there is formal education, there is non-formal, there is lifelong learning, there is continuous education, and this is very important. So yes, everybody has a role to play. The employers cannot expect from the educational system, because there is a lag, obviously, in developing the new skills. It is down to the individual, cannot expect the employer or the educational system. But also the role of the employers is very important, because you can speed up the process. You're like inside the labor market. So what you will do, with whatever consequences may have, because you may think that the employee may leave after I'm teaching him here, teaching her, and so on. But I think that your role is as important as the other actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our three speakers. I know Ms. Weber also does have a response to your question. So again, I would like to refer you to the networking lunch afterwards, and of course also encourage you to approach our experts and speakers to ask further questions. For now, I would like to conclude this first expert panel discussion round. And while you can return to your seats, I would like to welcome the two new experts with me on stage. Whilst we transition, I would just like to let you know that also people participating online, you have the possibility to also ask questions in the chat. I can see or can follow the discussions in the chat. So if you do want to pose a question to either these speakers or the next speakers, then please post something in the chat. Schneider, you can come here. Okay. Welcome to our new experts on stage. The next panel is about the topic, getting the right balance, challenges and opportunities to ensure the future is fair, just, healthy and safe for the EU and beyond. So for this panel discussion, we will be looking at the interconnections of skills together with safety, but we will also try to look beyond Europe and connect the previous discussions which we had with a broader perspective. So let me welcome our two new experts. I would like to start with you, Ms. Castel-Branco. You are a senior expert in qualification system and labor market information at ETF. It's great to have you here with us.
Thank you.
Ms. Schneider is senior OSH and policy specialist at EU-OSHA, where she works since 2002, so also quite a lot of expertise here. Thank you for joining us in the panel. My first question would go to you, Ms. Branco. I would like to get your perspective on topics we've previously already discussed. However, we know that it is important to also have an overview of skills in the countries outside the EU, which we briefly touched upon but didn't go too much into detail. Can you give us an overview of skill trends globally and how needs in countries are covered by ETF and by the work you're doing at your agency?
Thank you very much. And again, this is an immense honor and privilege. Thank you all. So the scope of skills is very wide. It's a concept embracing a wide range of types of skills. So we are talking about basic, emerging, hybrid, green, transversal, specialized, digital, AI skills, and so on. And data is crucial and fortunately available in our datafied society. So there are these newer data analytics, which we are using in ETF, notably also in association with ESCO as a classification for, as a taxonomy for data classification. And let us look very quickly at a small sample of ETF countries from this perspective of the skills needs from the demand side. So ETF has then has put together databases of multi-million online job postings and from 6 countries. And these are the countries that I'm going to mention throughout this first question. The countries are Ukraine, Georgia, as well as Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, North Africa, and Kenya, Sub-Saharan Africa. And the data shows that demand for workers with higher level of skills continue to grow in a variety of jobs in the occupational groups of professionals, technicians, associate professionals, service and sales workers. Another important element that our data allows to show and to analyze is digital skills. For example, we know from that countries such as Ukraine, Egypt and Kenya have very high demand for digital skills. 90% of the vacancies mention at least one digital skill. And this is higher as compared with the other three countries, which I mentioned earlier, so Tunisia, Georgia and Morocco. And interesting, Egypt, demand for AI skills has almost doubled between 2021 and 2023. Green skills needs, a very important topic in this conversation today. So our data shows that the greenest of these 6 countries in terms of employers' demand is Kenya, followed by Tunisia and Egypt. And among the top 10 green skills identified through the data, they relate to, first of all, energy and transport, like renewable energy, energy conservation, electrical vehicles, but also to circular economy, sustainable business, agroforestry. Let's say a few words about Ukraine also. The data shows high difficulty to hire in a range of occupations and skills. The occupations are chemists, manufacturing managers, nurses, all sorts of engineers, building architects, interpreters, physiotherapists, financial services, and more. In terms of skills, difficulty to hire concerns skills of engineering trades, pharmacy, medical advice, problem solving, monitoring environmental conditions, information skills, and many other transversal skills. To conclude, a word of also bridging between this wider conversation on the third countries or non-EU countries and this very important topic of attracting skills and qualified people to the EU. So education, training, qualification systems have been embracing reforms, but we know, of course, that the linkages between the needs and the provision evolve, and this will continue to require improved measures. So when considering policies to attract people, qualified, skilled people to the EU, we need also to consider, never forget the needs of these countries. So a win-win-win perspective needs to be associated to these policies. So, and this win-win-win perspective needs also to consider investment rather than aid, as well as support programs that actually plug in with the national strategies of these countries. Otherwise, we will contribute to the risk of brain drain, low job creation, less opportunity for better economies, and this can only have dramatic consequences for stability, safety, social prosperity, nationally and internationally.
Thank you very much, Ms. Castel-Branco, for giving us an insight on the needs actually in the global market right now. We will talk about solutions and the partnerships ETF is having in a minute. But first, I would like to bring in your perspective, Ms. Schneider. We already identified that actually humans are the most valuable resource we have right now. And taking that as granted, we also need to look at their health and their well-being, which is EU-OSHA's focus. So I would now like to ask you, looking at all the shortages, all the new skills emerging that we need in Europe, but also globally, what trends do you foresee could bring new emerging health risks to the people, and what actions would need to be taken to actually support the health and well-being of people in the labor market?
Thank you for this question.
Please use this microphone.
Okay. So the adaptation to climate change and the strive for sustainable technologies leads to the creation of some new jobs. For example, in the energy sector, the green building or recycling, this has already been mentioned today. Some tasks and activities will be new, so you might have the use of robotics or exoskeletons at workplaces, but some may not be as new. These jobs may bring new occupational safety and health risks, but they may also bring new combinations of old risks. And I'd like to choose a practical example of that. If you think of a worker doing maintenance work on a windmill offshore, they will be exposed to working at height, not a new risk known from construction. They might have to work with dangerous substances because these windmill blades are built with polyester and use solvents. They might work in confined spaces, but all of this is not new, but comes in a new guise and in a new combination. So you will have to set measures and you will have to train workers accordingly to be able to work safely and also able to recognize OSH risks and notify, for example, some of these risks. So it's important that the risks are assessed in these new jobs and that this information is also channeled into training, into skills development, into vocational training. We should also consider that due to the accelerated technological development, future workers may have to change jobs at a much higher rate, but also within their jobs, there might be changes at a much higher rate. And if we think about reskilling, about upskilling, we also need to have there the health and safety conditions reflected in that. If you're changing jobs with different health and safety risks, you need to be equipped to work safely there. We're talking about the migrant workforce. So we have a growing migrant workforce in Europe, and still a significant proportion of those migrants work in professions that might have considerable health and safety risks. And also we should think about how to train and how to equip these workers to work safely, how to stimulate employers to pass on this information, to pass on the information, equip them for them to be able to participate in the processes of setting safer measures at workplaces. I'll give a practical example of a tool that we have. We have a language-free training materials that's animated films with Napo, a character that is in the meantime has become a star on YouTube with over 100,000 downloads. And this is a very good means of doing training in some of these low-skill jobs, for example, not only, but using them. We also offer some teacher toolkits for the NAPO and other more workplace-oriented resources for training. Maybe I'll also mention, because it's been mentioned before, our OSH VET project that is a cooperation between our national focal points and vocational training organizations to disseminate occupational safety and health information to vocational schools. And here, for example, I'll give an example of an initiative in France where young workers are included as a priority target in the national occupational safety and health strategy. There's a cooperation between the Ministry of Labor and the Ministry of National Education to target young workers with health and safety information. And they've designed a handbook for young people for vocational training. So also addressing this important group of young workers that was mentioned here.
You did draw a good connection to also the international and intercultural also dimension of well-being and safety at work. And this brings me back to you, Ms. Castel-Branco. Could you give us an example of how ETF cooperates and establishes good partnerships with countries that kind of establish a system of both sending and receiving workers? Can you tell us about how you work together?
For this question. So in 4 points, I'll try to be very, very efficient. So partnerships, of course, work on the ground of equal and fair interplay for common interests and benefits. And partnership and participation is part of ETF DNA, let's say, philosophy and action. This permeates through all the initiatives, programs, advisory functions of the ETF. Secondly, ETF is currently boosting investment in networks that, for example, promote experience sharing, sometimes with traits of South-South cooperation. It's about skills anticipation and matching, modernization of qualifications, systems, new learning, green skills, excellence in vocational education and training systems, and of course, system monitoring, already mentioned earlier by our director. So, and the Torino process is an example of this resilience of networks. It has evolved over the last decade and is now very appealing for a number of new countries. Third, the ongoing joint work with the European Qualifications Framework, EQF, on the comparison of EQF with national and regional qualifications frameworks of other countries outside the EU and the EQF area. So this is a very interesting partnership and activity, building a new space and even a new approach to generate mutual trust, fair recognition of qualifications, and all based on dialogue, joint analysis, and planning. The first two countries that have now completed this process are very different. The first was Ukraine, and now one African country, the first one, Cabo Verde. And the next comparison will take place now in a bit of an uncharted territory, if we can call it, but very promising. It is the community of 16 countries of Southern Africa, the SADC region. Fourth, almost finished, Africa. We all know it's the youth repository of the world. Hence, skills and jobs are crucial. And the last case I'm going to briefly report about is the exciting African Continental Qualifications Framework. It's a project of the EU, European Union, African Union Partnership, which ETF was invited to implement now in the period 2023-2026, making best possible use of EU taxpayers' money to improve youth mobility, lifelong learning, comparability, transparency, and connections between all African qualifications frameworks, establishing a novel digital platform of qualifications and credentials across Africa, a campaign supporting recognition of prior learning, so also the non-formal, informal learning, so important in Africa, working together with the African Union for better skills mobility, and eventually closer bridges afterwards with the EQF. So this is also part of this creation of a global transparency. And maybe I'd like also to add that ACQF, the project, is not working at all in isolation. It's part of a very large, important flagship of the European Union. It is called the Youth Mobility Flagship for Africa. It is also related with the Global Gateway investment, as you know. And this way, by being part of this flagship, ACQF impact can be multiplied. Let me also add, if you don't mind, so 2024, it's important to bear this in mind, is the African Year of Education, and this flagship will contribute to it. And somebody mentioned earlier skills revolution, and I'd like also to emphasize this is a major topic explicitly mentioned in the long-term strategy for Africa, Agenda 2023. That's now the last point I'd like still to emphasize here. The experience of the ACQF project was selected by the UN, by the United Nations, for the UN 2023 publication, Good Practices in South-South and Triangular Cooperation, Transforming Education and Delivering on the SDG 4. So this is a forthcoming publication. It's all supported, facilitated by United Nations South-South Cooperation Office. And so the ACQF as a policy instrument, the work done in the first period is in a way, let's say, appreciated this way. And ACQF is not only an intention, it's already born, it has been validated as the policy instrument for the African Union at the Addis conference of 11th and 13th of July 2023. And one of the important features and commitments of the ACQF as the largest regional qualifications framework globally is no country is left behind. If you are interested, visit www.acqf.africa.
Thank you very much for, again, your perspective from the international level. I would now like to conclude by looking basically at how we can be future fit. If we see now all the labor movements that we will be having, mainly also hopefully young people coming to Europe, going from Europe, the question is how can we prepare for future skills needed? So my question to you, Ms. Schneider, would be how or what does EU-OSHA propose? How can we identify current need of future skills better to actually also ensure the health and safety of these workers in the future?
Thank you. So maybe I'd like to make the link. Yeah, to make the link to what was said earlier about the healthcare workforce. So EU-OSHA is, for example, addressing the health and safety of the healthcare workforce after all the developments that we've seen after the COVID-19 pandemic and people moving out of the profession, to identify the new OSH risks in these professions. And we'd like to channel that information into education, into vocational education, for example. And that includes identifying also knowledge gaps of employers, not only of workers, and identifying potential skill gaps then there that need to be filled. We have developments like digitalization that also concern, for example, the healthcare sector. We are also running a Healthy Workplaces campaign on safe and healthy work in the digital age. Also very important, we talked a lot about digitalization in this session today. We know about awareness gaps that are present in many professions. So for example, on the use of dangerous substances, and it has become very obvious in the COVID pandemic, also on biological risks at work. Training has been proven to be instrumental to avoid infections and exposure to chemicals. So this is also something that we try to address by channeling information into professions like agriculture, healthcare, but also other professions, for example, waste management, recycling, where these are really important topics. We addressed new OSH risks also in our foresight studies, where, for example, we looked at green jobs. We have carried out one on the circular economy and one on digitalization, where we also address skills needed for the future, especially occupational safety and health knowledge that should be implemented into training plans, into vocational training, and so on. Maybe let me say that there are some health and safety trends that come with the changes. For example, the rise in mental health disorders or ergonomic risks due to changes at the workplaces, and employers need to be equipped to address the root causes of this and to include the issues and the prevention of these risks. I'm particularly looking at psychosocial risks, where we will also have a major initiative, the prevention of these risks, and also proper training for their workers, and equipping them also to be able to participate in the processes for decisions or measures at the workplaces. And we do look forward also to cooperating more closely, for example, with Cedefop, where there will be an official agreement signed on vocational education and on activities on vocational education. So we will continue all these efforts together with our colleagues from the other agencies.
So again, what we can see here is also the role of acting proactively and to put an emphasis also on prevention and to actually become future fit. Before we conclude today's discussion, and we are slightly behind time, still I don't want to cut short the audience dialogue. I would now like to give again you the possibility to take the floor and to ask a question to our speakers. First, however, I know that we have also two MEPs in the room who are quite interested in the topic. So I would ask Ms. Jongerius and Mr. Alberkeke if you would like to pose a question to the panel.
Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for organizing this session, because I think this is exactly what we need at this moment. I had two questions, and the first question is about that labor migration is often presented as the solution for shortages on the labor markets. While on the other hand, you see that if you look closely at migration and the countries where, let's say, third country nationals are coming from, they are not quite linked. So those people trying to get to the European continent over the Mediterranean are different than the ones let's say, that are working in the transport sector or in the agricultural sector. So my question would be, and that would be the question in the direction of Ms. Castel Branco. how can we really combine these shortages on the labor market with migration, knowing that the labor shortages are also, in my opinion, mostly there where the working conditions are poor and the pay is also not that well. So I'm really thinking, how can we really make it a win-win situation? And because I don't believe that labor migration is the solution for labor shortages, I also have a question to in the direction of Mrs. Sneyer. If I look, for instance, in my own country, and it's not only happening in the Netherlands, our problem with labor shortages in the healthcare sector is not that we don't skill enough people, but when they have entered the profession, they don't know how quickly they can leave again. And that is something, says something about how the labor conditions are in this sector. So can we, in a way, if we are talking about the right balance, also see how we can retain people who are already skilled instead of getting new people over and over again in? So that would be my questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much for your question. Again, because of time, I just want to remind you, please keep your answers short and concise again. Ms. Castel-Branco, would you like to start with the first question?
Thanks for this question. Legal skilled labor migration arrangements, programs can be a response if they are properly coordinated. So where the receiving countries on the EU side and the countries of origin enter into a very clear conversation on what are the needs and what will be then, for example, the rights and possibilities for further career and professional development of the people who will be coming to the EU. So it's around coordinated legal skilled labor migration arrangements. However, this is not necessarily very easy. There have been a number of programs already for generations, for decades, so such as mobility partnerships, programs with a number of countries. There is now the talent partnership coming up. There are also, of course, analyses that are done regularly by all the agencies on the occupations and skills in high demand and shortage. So it's about what, as I said, the legal skilled labor migration. There are also possibilities, I will finish, to, for example, maybe benefit of the possibility to train, retrain those people from different countries that are already in the EU, including students. That could also be a way to cope with this important need in the EU, but not forgetting ever the needs of the sending countries.
Thank you very much. Ms. Schneider.
Yes, indeed. And that because of the shortness of time, I didn't have the time to insist on that. Indeed, it is a highly skilled workforce that leaves the workplaces because the conditions are not as they should be. And that's precisely why the agency is conducting this large activity on the healthcare sector, that it has been highlighted as a really important topic. Also to look at where there are still gaps. And I would say even the healthcare sector is a sector where there are gaps on the management of biological agents, which became very, very evident in the COVID-19 pandemic and so on. So there are some needs there, some awareness raising to be done also among employers. It is not only health and safety, of course. It's been highlighted by the other speakers here that there are a lot of issues there, but certainly a joint effort, for example, across our agencies will be needed and will be very keen on cooperating with the other agencies on this important topic in particular. Let me just say, it's not the only one. There are the issues in the transport sector where it's a similar situation. We also have pretty bad conditions there, and we have a similar situation. We are looking up psychosocial risks in the construction sector at the moment, also a very, very important issue. So.
Thank you for your answers. Mr. Albuquerque, do you have questions?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be here and for the organization of this very timely event. I will try to be brief, but I could also not start without saying that we keep on talking about, I mean, it's the most recurrent speech from politicians, but also from companies, that there is a lack of skilled work. And I think we should start on that reflection of what is skilled and unskilled. I would make a very strong argument that there is no such thing as unskilled work. So I think we risk on creating this gap of what we consider to be skilled and unskilled work. Then that, of course, the pandemic put us into the confrontation of seeing that even those jobs that we consider to be unskilled are in fact essential. So I think we should also try to create the strategies, and what was mentioned from dear friends from LLP and other partners regarding transferable skills, but also social competencies are very important even on those jobs that are traditionally, also to oversimplify, considered to be unskilled work. But my question is, on this matter, the title of this panel is also about a future that is fair and just, of course, healthy and safe as well, but fair and just. And when we keep on talking about the need for skilled work, we often say that we cannot find the right people. So my question goes in the direction of trying to understand what can also be done in terms of preparing the companies and the public sector, or the employers, so to say, to give the fair remuneration and to adapt the labor conditions to the skilled workers that they are trying to attract. Because if we are putting effort and if we are putting investment in reskilling, upskilling the workers, then we also need to make sure that we are creating the conditions that these people that are making personal investments, we have just visited important investments that are being done in Portugal, for example. There was a recent case of a refinery that was closed, and these workers are being reskilled to work as train drivers. I'm lacking the word in English, sorry. So of course it's a just transition. It's a transition in the direction of a green economy. But how are we going to make sure that these jobs that were also sometimes very well remunerated keep on the same levels of salary, and that these people are being attracted and being remunerated according to the investment that they are making in terms of their skills and their upgrading of their own capacities?
Thank you very much for your question. Just briefly, I would like to take one audience question, so I need your answers to be really short in order to manage that. Okay, I would like to give Ms. Schneider the floor first, and then Ms. Castelbranco for a very brief answer.
So indeed, what we see is that awareness raising is not only needed, and skills development is not only needed on the side of the workers, but also on the side of the employers on health and safety issues. And I've mentioned a few examples there. We do work with vocational education establishments, to organizations to bring in the health and safety aspects already at an early stage in the skills development of workers there, for example, to have the health and safety aspects represented there, so that workers are equipped also to assess the conditions at their work and to highlight occupational safety and health risks, for example.
Thank you very much. And Ms. Castelbranco, please.
Very quick. So employer's perspective, but from really the employer's perspective, skills. I would mention, for example, the importance of employers, companies contributing and continuing to cooperate in terms of validation and recognition of already existing skills from work experience, etc., transforming these existing skills invisible into visible. This gives a very important boost to motivation and also to inclusion in productive jobs, decent jobs. This is fundamental, for example, in the context of Africa, and it's happening.
Thank you for your very short answers to this question. We are running a bit out of time. I still would like to take one audience question that can be answered very briefly. After that, we are going to transition to the two closing speeches and then conclude with the live networking. Please.
Thank you, Larissa Loic from the Austrian Chamber of Labor. And I have a question to Ms. Castelbranco, because you mentioned we have to work with countries outside of the EU. And you mentioned Ukraine, which is one of the 9 countries we hope soon to be within the Union. And do you have any policies that you already want to implement now? Because especially for the region of the Western Balkans, we have a lot of brain drain. So young, high-skilled people going to the European Union. And how can we find a way that once these countries are part of the European Union, we don't have the situation, because I think this is very important if we think of a just transition, that we have a lot of high-skilled jobs in Western and Central European countries, and in the new member states, hopefully soon, new member states, we have low-skilled jobs. So how can we find a balance which is fair?
Please.
I'm not sure I understood very well the point. So are you speaking about how to better integrate in matching jobs the people coming from, for example, Ukraine, so that avoiding the problem of overqualification, overskilling, etc.? Yeah.
Would you maybe briefly like to rephrase your question once again?
So a bit like fair integration in the labor market.
In the sense of not having specific countries where most people are in low-skilled jobs, and then specific countries where most people have high-skilled jobs. Because I believe it's important to have a mixture of both.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a situation we already can see in some member states, and what can we do so that it doesn't happen with new member states as well?
We can avoid brain drain.
Ukraine, I'm taking just Ukraine as an example, has been indeed a country of ascending country for years, not only now with the issue of the war. But in fact, Ukraine is not a country that we can say is a country of low-skilled jobs at all. Demand for high-skilled jobs in the occupational groups, professionals, and is very, very high in the Ukraine. And Ukraine has also currently even an issue of difficulty to hire exactly for jobs such as engineers, etc., as I mentioned earlier. How to avoid the brain drain? It's a matter, of course, the conversation we had earlier. So investment instead of aid, and plugging into the national strategies. If we can say that our programs, our supports or cooperation programs plug in the national strategies, and often it's not really the case. We do too much of other things, and we forget, in a way, part of the real needs of countries. This is a topic that is very important now in the South-South cooperation and conversation. Investment instead of aid, and plug in the national strategies.
Thank you to both of you for this very insightful final panel discussion round. Unfortunately, we don't have time to take more questions, but again, I would like to refer you to the networking lunch, where you will have the possibility to speak to all speakers as well as the directors. Before we conclude now, I would like to refer you to 2 events that are going to take place where the discussions of today will actually be continued. So Eurofound will be holding a joint event in October 10th in Brussels at the Ton Hotel together with ILO on the topic of how to ensure decent job and work quality for essential workers. So that's also quite connected to today's discussion, and you can register on the Eurofund's website. Secondly, Cedefop is organizing its flagship conference, Mind the Gaps, also here in Brussels on the 12th of October. So if you're already here, you can even visit both events. You're all invited to participate. And if you are interested, then you can contact our speaker, Elias Livanos, who can refer you to the registration. I will not try to attempt to summarize the discussions. I will leave that up to our two final speakers. So at this point, let me say goodbye and thank you for the great discussions we had during the panel. And I'm very happy to now be able to hand over to Denis Jonton, Director of the European Pillar of Social Rights. Please join me on stage. And Mr. Pislerus as well.
Thank you so much. The name tag to remove it.
Please take this one.
Thank you. Thank you. I would like to thank the chair and your team for the organization of this event. When we were approached a couple of weeks ago, your team came to see us. We were, of course, extremely pleased to see that there would be a second edition of such an event. And we were as well extremely pleased about the topic that you chose. And I remember that in your introductory remarks, you really made a kind of call for a comprehensive approach to meet the skills challenge. And I hope that with what our colleagues from the agencies told us, they have managed to convince you and the audience that indeed we are following a very comprehensive approach to meet the skills challenge. From, from Ella and Cosmin and his colleagues, we heard about, labor mobility being part of the solution. From EU-OSHA, William and his colleagues, we heard how important it is that workers are equipped with the right skills to carry out their tasks. From Eurofound, Ivalo and his colleagues, we heard how important it is to better know what we are talking about when it comes to labor shortages and the attractivity of the workplace. From the Cedefop, Jürgen and his colleagues, we heard how important it is to help our labor force to cope with the latest trends and needs of the labor market. He mentioned this upgrading game. And from the ETF, Sylvie and her colleagues, we heard how important it is to look at the neighboring countries and beyond. So indeed, I mean, the only conclusion I can draw is how important it is for all of us to join forces to meet the skill challenges. The good news here is that we have a good momentum thanks to the European Year of Skills and all what my colleagues who are there, Manuela and her teams, are doing in supervising, managing this European Year of Skills. We have a good momentum. We have this event, but there are many others. We have a good expertise here in the Commission, but in our agencies as well. So I hope we have convinced you about that. And indeed, you could maybe have this, make this comment and say there are maybe too many cooks here. And well, indeed, there is a need for a kind of enhanced coordination here. And this on the skills challenges, and we are convinced as well that this go beyond, and there are other topics that we all together could work on. So this is why, and thanks again for having organized this event, that we, and this is not a secret, I mean, we will continue the discussion with our agencies. We talk a lot to all of our agencies, but not at the same time in the same meeting room. So
this afternoon, we will continue the discussion with them and see how we can best cooperate with each other. And of course, we will keep you in the loop of what we will discuss and decide. Of course, we will respect the role, the mandate of and the governance of each agency. This we do not want to challenge, obviously, but we simply need to discuss and see how we can join forces on all the different challenges that we have on skills, but others as well. So thanks again. Maybe a final word, because you made some publicity, so I will make some publicity as well. There is a topic that we have not, well, we have touched upon it, but not that much, which is artificial intelligence. We will organize an event on the 16th and 17th of November. This is our social forum. It will take place here in Brussels. And today we have opened, there is a website, it's EU-social-forum.eu, so you can go on it. Our agencies, by the way, will be part of the forum. They will be there as well. So if you want, and the Parliament will be there, of course. So if you want to have additional information on the event, the program, it's now available, and you can even register online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Janton, also for taking the time being here, listening to these important discussions, and where I can say, I think I can speak for the audience. I'm very happy to see that this interconnectedness and the work, the joint force work, is being continued. Now, Mr. Pislarus, you opened this event. You will be now the one closing this event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will start with a big thanks for all of you that attended here in the room, in the European Parliament or online the event. I think that this flagship event is just a good reminder of how encompassing the skills theme is. And for us in the Parliament, I would like to thank very much my colleagues. I'm really honored to work with an amazing team of MEPs in the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. Day after day, we've pushed for the European Social Pillar. And right now on the skills, this is something that unites us. Politically, we really believe in the Employment and Social Affairs Committee and in the European Parliament that we can have both a fair and a competitive Europe. And skills are for a decent living, for better paid jobs, and at the same time, for competitive enterprises and for pushing the competitiveness of Europe at global level. And of course, last but not least, skills and this investment in skills is indeed an investment in the future, as we are facing amazing challenges ahead of us. I'm so proud that the European Parliament has been able to push this agenda forward. I'm really keen to see the developments in this particular year of European Year of Skills. This is not just, or this is how we think about it from the European Parliament side, this is not just a year of awareness. This should be a year of changing the paradigm of how we regard skills. And it has been said in the morning that we've been talking about skills in the past. The way in which we need to refocus our talk when we talk about skills, that's important. And I will conclude with the fact that, again, investing in skills is investing in people. And that's first and foremost. And I believe that it's in our interest and benefit to work on these issues and make this happen. And it will not happen just from Brussels. That's clear. It will happen if we convince the ecosystems, the local level, to pursue that. The whole reform that we are putting forward, the change of paradigms, are about local strategies on how to improve skills, development of one-stop shops, local hubs for skills development, and in the end, to convince the individual citizens of the Union, the people that are working here, that investing in their skills will provide them a better life, a better career opportunity. Investing in the skills of their children will be indeed an investment that they can actually do. I would say that this is a topical issue for the future, and I'm so proud that we had the chance to discuss about it. And I will use my closing remarks to provide again a big thanks to the European Commission. We've been working very, very closely. for the past years, and I think we have achieved quite a lot. Of course, DG Employment was the spearhead of this, but I would like to thank also the other DGs, given the way in which we see that in an integrated fashion. I would like to thank again the 5 agencies, Eurofound, Cedefop, ETF, EU-OSHA, and ELA, and their directors for their efforts day after day during the pandemic, right now, facing the Russia aggression in Ukraine and the cost of living crisis, and preparing for the future of the European Union. I would like to thank the joint team, because all the agencies and the Commission put together amazing people to organize this event. And of course, last but certainly not least, I would like to thank my own team. A special thanks to Patricia, Anna, Maria, Tana, and Medea for helping us organize the event. They are really amazing, as you are all. Thank you very much for that, and let's continue our quest for skills in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking the time, and sorry for taking more time than planned. Thank you.
Ok, well done, madame.